Hello and welcome to today's presentation on why you should resolve to build a better backup plan in 2014, utilizing the cloud, dedupe, and encryption. Brought to you by Unitrends, unified data protection without limits. Learn more at unitrends.com. A couple of quick housekeeping notes before we begin. First of all, if you have a question, great. Please submit your questions and your comments using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your console. If we don't answer your questions during today's presentation, then we'll do our best to get back to you via email or some other means. Also, if you can't wait, email right now, info@unitrends.com, or call 866-359-5411. And I think you'll see that number on your screen right there in the middle of that slide window. And also the slides will replay. We'll send you a link to a recording of this webinar and associated slides within the next 48 hours, usually sooner. As soon as it's finished, we'll send you a link, everybody who registered, a link with the information so that you can watch it again. And by all means, we hope you'll share it with anyone you feel appropriate. And again, if you have a question that just can't wait, you can also send an email to Reid, J-R-E-I-D, at unitrends.com. And hello to our good friend Jen at Unitrends also. Today's presentation should last about 60 minutes, so by all means you can begin submitting your questions now, and we'll get to those somewhere around 45 minutes from now. Okay, let's talk about our presenter. Subho Guha is Vice President, Product Management and Marketing at Unitrends, and he has over 24 years of strategic planning, product management, marketing, and business directions in product marketing and management, alliances and business development, general manager level business and R&D management. Definitely the person that we want to hear from today when we start talking about this issue of unified data protection and how you can keep your business safe. Subho, great to have you, and with that, I'll let you take it away.
All right, thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone for joining today. I think what we will have a lively presentation to talk about trends in the industry we see from our customers as it relates to data protection. More importantly, these are topical areas that I hear constantly from our customers that's keeping them up at night, because as you can imagine, data is the livelihood of all businesses, that customers, how they run their business. So we're going to talk about three topical areas. One is going to be about cloud and replication, because you're hearing a lot about the cloud and how data protection fits in. And then I'll go into some critical areas of technologies that are relevant for data protection, such as deduplication as well as encryption. So let's talk about cloud and replication. The biggest thing that we hear in the industry is there's an extreme amount of frustration with the complexity of offers that customers are having to do when it comes to data protection. Customers have an extremely heterogeneous environment, and what does that mean? Customers have physical servers, they have virtual machines that increasing their virtualization capabilities. They have numerous applications. But at the end of the day, if you're a mid-market customer or mid-sized customer, you really don't want to worry about, how do I protect my data and applications? In the past, there were several solutions offered to provide the protection, whether you're trying to do virtualization, whether you're trying to do physical, whether you're trying to do storage. And one of the surveys that's come out in the recent years is there's a dramatic level of frustration among customers that are saying by 2016, almost a third of organizations will change their backup vendors, which is pretty shocking. And the reason is because of this cost, complexity, and capability. Customers in general do not want to worry about having multiple solutions to manage the entire environment, and this cost and complexity and capability is leading to a lot of dissatisfaction. We actually add two other areas of C's, which are the completeness and scale, and more importantly, customer support. A thing that we hear a lot and why we're seeing such a big growth in our business is customers really just don't want to focus on the technology, they want to run their business. And the last thing they want to do is having to manage multiple capabilities to provide scaling of their business versus having a more unified approach to data protection. So the goal that we definitely see is people want to eliminate complexity, and they want to be able to have a more unified approach to being able to manage the data, applications, and infrastructure. So what are the ways customers have been doing this? There's a terminology that you're familiar with. People talk about in your environment you have lots and lots of data which are stored on disk. Typically you want to back up that data to another disk, and then you want to be able to have another protection for recovery in the event of a disaster recovery or being able to recover a different point of time of data that you need. So this whole concept of disaster recovery, there's different methods a customer can adopt. It's disk to X. And what can X be? X can be data that's stored in a cloud, which could be private, meaning in a alternative site for a customer, or it could be in a public multi-tenant cloud that you can access anytime, anywhere. A lot of customers still are using rotational archiving methods, where you put it to tape or local drives, then you ship it off, and then you retrieve it from another location. Or people are going straight to also storage arrays like SANs, NAS, and DAS. But there is no one shoe fits all, and customers want to be able to have the ability to be able to adopt all the data protection needs onto virtual data protection appliances or physical data protection appliances, but then have a very strong disaster recovery plan with these different options as I talked about. What we recommend as the best practice is really a hybrid approach. A hybrid disaster recovery strategy provides various multiple benefits to customers. One is you have data that's kept on premise, which provides the capability to make sure that you have critical data on site when you need it, but then you replicate that data off premise. And that off-premise, as we talked about in the prior slide, could be on the cloud, or it could be in a private cloud in a different site, or it could be off-site. This allows you to meet your recovery objectives because you want to be able to recover your core and critical data in the event of a disaster as rapidly, as soon as you can, and most securely as you can. So recovery becomes more critical than just backup. And having a hybrid strategy allows you to have the best of both worlds. You will have an on-premise set of data and applications and infrastructure which is always readily available. You will always have a replicated image of that data at an off-site location. This will minimize the outage and unplanned downtime so that you don't have revenue loss due to downtime. Now, as we talked about, the name of the game in the future is about recovery. So every customer may have a different practice for DR and disaster recovery. No matter what disaster recovery method you choose, you really want to ask yourself these questions. How quickly can you recover your data? How quickly can you recover your system in which you store the data? And more importantly, in the event of a physical disaster, how quickly can you recover on your premise? So it's all about your time that you're willing to be able to tolerate to recover your data. And customers have different tiers of data. Some are tolerable that you can get in minutes, in days, or you may have data that's probably you can do a scheduled maintenance and recover. So it's very important to have a DR practice, but consider these questions when you think of the different solutions. So what do we deliver? So the solutions that we deliver from a capability for customers, we understand that no one shoe fits all. And customers want to be able to have solutions on-premise for security reasons, for speed of how soon they can back up capabilities. So we provide on-premise solutions and we protect a heterogeneous environment. It could be applications, virtual, physical, any type of storage, which could be SANs, NAS, or DAS. And we provide a very heterogeneous capability to protect what you have on premise. And we provide that through multiple capabilities. Some of our customers say, provide me a complete offering, which includes the software, which includes the hardware and storage. And for that, we provide a physical backup appliance, which is an all-in-one capability with all the capabilities you need to protect your virtual and your physical and virtual assets. Or some customers want to have more of a software-based offering, and we provide a virtual appliance which can be storing and supporting your solutions based on Hyper-V or VMware's ESX technology. In addition to that, as we talked about the disk-to-disk-to-X, customers may want to locally on-premise archive their data. So protection and being able to archive that data to disk, tape, or to other storage capabilities is also supported. And that provides maximum protection of all your data, infrastructure, and applications on-premise. But we don't stop there because we understand that all data cannot be safe on-premise. So all our solutions are cloud-enabled, which allows us to have an off-premise disaster recovery solution for our customers. And so we have the capability to store and replicate your data that's on-premise on a constant basis so that you can be protected from a disaster recovery. You can archive the data as well as you can replicate it. We also have solutions where you may have a preference of a third-party cloud offering where you want to archive. And so we have some exciting capabilities on the cloud capabilities, and we're extremely excited about this capability because this allows us to provide different cloud solutions as cloud adoption starts to increase over time. So this is an important area of when we talk about replication and the cloud. Our theory and what we've been seeing a tremendous amount of growth is the hybrid cloud approach is the most secure, most critical way to be able to manage your data quickly on-premise, but then be able to do a quick disaster recovery capability off-premise. So now let's talk about some key technologies that are going to be important when we talk about disaster recovery, data protection. You probably hear a term that's often used. It's called deduplication. And deduplication has been around for a long time, and there are different forms of compression. People tend to think deduplication or compression in terms of, basically what customers want to do is always to have very secure, very reliable data protection. But, data is growing, right? How can I make sure that I'm optimizing how much I have to store? So, people are concerned about, the data storage amount. So what deduplication is a form of lossless compression. And it allows you to, any duplicate data that exists can be deleted so that you're not continuously expanding your storage requirements. So stubs point back to a set of original data. It knows what the original data was. If there's a change, it really just makes sure that you're optimizing the amount of data. Now, it works better against smaller data backups. Obviously, as you get into larger and larger, deduplication starts getting to be very complex. Another concept that you'll hear, and I'm going to go into more detail, is called encryption. And encryption attempts to make data unreadable by eliminating patterns. So while encryption is a great security capability, it negatively impacts compression and deduplication. And I'm going to talk in detail about encryption in the next section. And I'm going to be also talking about why encryption is critical, but keep this in fact that while we want to keep things secure, it comes at a cost, and it'll come at a cost in terms of how much you can compress and dedupe. So, just to think about in terms of what deduplication is, there's a term that customers are probably familiar with, or you heard in the industry. You've probably heard of source deduplication versus target deduplication. And basically what that means is when you think about source deduplication, basically you're doing the deduplication operation at the protected resource. So basically at the point of where the data is starting from, you're doing the deduplication at the source. Target is where you do deduplication where the data after you backed it up will be residing. Think of this picture here where you have a dart and a target, right? So the dart would be your source, and then where you're trying to put it on the map will be your target. In a cloud type environment we just talked about, in a hybrid type environment, there are different ways you can do source and target, right? So when you back up something on premise, that actually starts to become your source, and your target becomes the data on the cloud. So use the word source and target depending on exactly where you're starting to initiate as well as you're trying to replicate. So depending on your environment, there may be different variations of source and target. Now let's talk about the different other aspects of deduplication. Inline versus post-processing. So what inline means is your deduplicating happens before the data is stored. So basically you're doing it before anything happens, you're doing the deduplication. Post-processing means you're deduplicating after the data is stored. So basically after you've moved the data over, you've done the ingestion, then you're doing the deduplication. So inline has a negative impact of ingest. And now what does that mean? It obviously is going to take more time to start ingesting the data where you're storing it if you're going to do an inline. Post-processing may also have the same effect because you're having to wait. The whole point is when you're looking at different technologies for deduplication, you really don't want to be standing in a line too long. That's the whole concept. So make sure you're kind of looking at the different aspects of what makes sense when you're looking at the different options for deduplication. Skip through some of these. So the other thing that we wanted to talk about was file versus block versus byte level deduplication. There's different ways of how you can do deduplication. One is file. File level deduplication works on a per file basis. Block level deduplication works per block. Byte level is going into even a further level of detail where you're working below the block level. So you have a choice. Different customers, depending on the type of data they have, they may prefer to say, since I have more file-based data, I probably would prefer more of a file-based deduplication. Some other customers may prefer more doing at a block level because the deduplication rates are better in that type of scenario. So it all depends on the type of data you have and what you're trying to compress and deduplicate. Hardware versus software. This is an interesting aspect in terms of how you're trying to deduplicate. There are different types of methods of how you can do the deduplication. Some of the solutions out there will do a hardware-based deduplication. Basically what that means is it's integrated into the backup offering or the storage device where you are doing the deduplication. Sometimes there's a software to do that deduplication, but it's separate. In some other solutions in the marketplace, you can take advantage of a purely software-based deduplication. And the only challenge with having a separate software solution is you have to integrate with your hardware solution. You have to take into consideration the management cost of managing and monitoring the software solution separately from the hardware. So there are pros and cons. So be careful in terms of when you're looking at the different options of a hardware versus software-based solution. There are some pros and cons of using either or. Now this picture you see droplets of rain. Why am I introducing rain? Rain is a term actually we use, a redundant array of inexpensive nodes. So when you have rain, which are basically an array of different nodes where your storage is kept, there's different ways you can do the storage and deduplication. There's a term that people use which is local versus global. And people use this in different manners. One way to think of local versus global deduplication is local deduplication occurs only on a single device, where global means you're doing deduplication across multiple devices. Some other folks use the terminology differently. Some people think local deduplication is just about a single VM versus global is multiple VMs. So depending on how you want to use the terminology, it's about Do you do a single instance or you do multiple instances? Again, there's pros and cons when you're trying to do deduplication, and the rates, the ingestion rates have different aspects in terms of when you do this. So I've thrown out a bunch of different terminologies. We talked about, what does deduplication mean? Do you do it at the source? Do you do it at the target? Do you want to do inline-based deduplication? Or do you want to be able to do post-processing deduplication? We talked about software versus hardware. We talked about file level, block level. So now you've got all these different terminologies and mumbo-jumbo of different options. You as a customer saying, okay, now how do I make sure I'm getting the right technology? I'm making a right decision in terms of what the right technologies that I should be looking at. Because storage is expensive, and obviously it is getting cheaper as we go from $1 per gigabyte. But you are worried about your expenses. So what's the best solution? So one of the things we talk about is, don't just listen to your vendor with all these different metrics that they'll throw at you. And here's some best practices I recommend usually in terms of, what you don't want. You want to avoid these shortcuts. So don't just be oblivious to physical storage cost. So when people just start throwing about, oh, this is your $1 per megabyte, $1 per gigabyte, $1 per terabyte, that's not all that's going to be important, because $1 per terabyte doesn't mean anything if you're just going to increase lots of terabytes. Don't just blindly believe data reduction ratios, because just having a ratio doesn't mean anything if you haven't optimized how you're managing and reducing the data required. Don't just focus on technology and also price per terabyte, because you may have a very cost-effective, a vendor may tell you, well, I have the lowest price per terabyte, but they don't have the right technologies to keep optimizing how you're storing, how you're compressing your data. So make sure you do a trade-off between the right technologies that exist in the solution versus the price you're paying for storage. And please, please do not blissfully accept ingest rates from vendors. They'll throw a lot of technical rates and terms, but rates don't mean anything until you understand exactly how your data is being stored. Do not neglect backup size, backup type, and your retention requirements. As we talked about, what's going to be most critical for customer is recovery. So don't just think about how you're getting the backup and disregard recovery. You cannot overlook your OpEx cost as a trade-off to your CapEx cost. So sometimes you'll say, hey, this backup appliance seems like a good deal price-wise, but then you start seeing increased cost of how you're managing your environment. Your administrative costs start going up, how much you have to integrate, your maintenance starts going up, and soon you're starting to see your OpEx far outweighs your capital expenditure, and you do not want to be in that type of situation. You also don't want to be in a situation where you're not paying attention to your servers, your workstation, PC, and notebook overhead. Are you causing a bottleneck in your networking bandwidth? You do not want to do that. And last, but most importantly, don't forget security. You cannot ignore the impact of encryption. Data loss, data breach, which I'll cover in the next section, the loss to what it can impact a business far outweighs the cost you may have saved by going with a more cheaper or something that may be an inadequate solution to manage your solution requirements. So let's talk about a concept we call adaptive deduplication. Adaptive deduplication is a term we use at Unitrends. Is a hybrid data reduction technology. And think of it as it takes the advantage of all the terminologies I talked about. It combines inline compression with post-processing data deduplication. Remember I talked about inline, the pros and cons of doing, do you do it at the source of when you want to compress the data, or do you want to do it after it has been ingested and you want to be able to do it after post-processing? Adaptive takes advantage of both, so in-flight as well as being able to do it after it's processed. It does not require expensive dedicated hardware. So it basically is integrated into your backup appliance solution as well as integrated as part of a software offering, so you don't have to worry about this hardware versus software. So adaptive, by its term and what it means, basically it adapts dynamically. It's content aware, and I can't stress enough how important that is. Content aware deduplication is probably the most important, and people forget about what they're trying to compress and reduce their storage. It is intelligent enough to understand based on the content how much it needs to deduplicate. It understands how much the compression needs to be. It understands how to do deduplication. It allows you to look at alternative and available secondary storage or primary storage. It is also cognizant to the amount of processing power that you need. So when I talked about, do not get duped by dedupe and the best practices, here's an example of when you look at a technology, and for us at Unitrends, we're very proud of our adaptive deduplication. Remember the things we said, you need to take into consideration? Make sure you look at compression versus dedupe. Well, with adaptive, it kind of does both. It does inline versus post-processing. You want to be able to do source versus target, right? There's benefits of both, right? With the adaptive, we focus on the target because we truly believe you do not want to be able to congest the processing that's going to be needed at the source, and you're able to do it at a post-processing level so that you can allow to do the ingestion as well as the post-processing requirements to optimize that. It's not just about file or block. We go down to the byte level, right, so that you're able to do at a very granular level the amount of compression. It is a hardware-based solution, but it's integrated software into your all-in-one appliance. So you don't have to worry about all the management, maintenance, and other costs we talked about. Local versus global. It's actually a combination of local and global. On the physical appliance or on the virtual appliance, it can manage a single virtual machine or multiple virtual machines, but it also allows you to optimize all the management you need to do on that local appliance. So this hopefully gives you a good overview around deduplication. So now let's shift gear. We talked about how important it is to manage your data protection on your premise to the cloud in an integrated fashion. We talked about how important it is to optimize how much storage and how you avoid redundancy and how much you back up every time there's a change in your environment, which is the whole name of the game about deduplication. Make sure that you optimize the storage requirements. So now let's conclude the session with how do you make sure that your data protection is secure? So what is encryption? Encryption comes from a historical term we call cryptology. And basically what it is a process that converts original information, which typically is plain text, into a difficult to interpret form called ciphertext. So basically think of it as you've got plain text and then you're converting it into something that's scrambled, which is called ciphertext. There are different encryption algorithms available in the marketplace, which is basically a formula, which allows you to convert this plain text into a ciphertext. There are two types of encryption, asymmetric and symmetric. I'll let you read this Dilbert, but as you can see from here, there's obviously advantages of encryption to be secure, but there can also be abuse. In this case, Dilbert, craftily says, yeah, we have lots of ways to do encryption, and we'll also make sure nobody can access it. Well, that's an abuse, right? You want to make sure you can encrypt and decrypt, but you also want to make sure it's accessible too. What's the history? Encryption's been around for ages. I mean, we're talking back in 1900 BC. There's earliest documented forms of cryptography in the market in our history. You've probably heard a term called Caesar cipher. Julius Caesar used to use this actually when he used to send messages. We used to call it left shift 3. Basically what it is, as you can see on the right, the decoder, if you've seen this, he used to use, for example, if you use the letter D, it actually means A. It's a left shift 3. So basically you'll kind of write it with this concept of ciphering it, so that, for the enemies out there, they won't understand what you're doing, but with this decoder you can easily encrypt it. You can imagine, when you're trying to do things that's illegal, you want to be able to scramble your messages, right? So in the Prohibition era, I'm sure there was a lot of encryption going on back then. Another comic, you see the Navajos, when we talk about the smoke signals. People were able to kind of understand smoke signals. Wouldn't you hate it if the Navajos didn't know how to encrypt smokes, right? So that would be kind of bad. So let's talk about keys, because when we talk about encryption, it's really about, keys, right? Keys are like passwords. So as I talked about, there's two types of encryption. There's the asymmetric and symmetric. The best way to explain this, and I know this is a busy slide, you feel free to look at this when you guys get a hold of this. Asymmetric, uses public and private keys. So it's a combination of public and private key. And what that means is you don't have to kind of exchange. So if I'm Alice talking to Mary, Alice and Mary don't have to, exchange the public key. But basically what it does is the sender and the recipient, they have the same encryption program on each side. So if someone wants to send you an encrypted message, you first need to generate a public key, which is out there, and a private key with the encryption application. You then send that person the public key. Using an asymmetric algorithm and your public key, the sender scrambles the message into a ciphertext, as we talked about, right? They send you the ciphertext, so you got the scrambled message. You run the ciphertext through your program, your encryption program, which then decodes the message using your private key. And if you want to send a message back, you then need the sender's public key to send that back. So as you can see, it's a complex, multiple key method of doing it. It is very CPU intensive because you're doing a lot of encryption, decryption, scrambling, unscrambling. Whereas on the symmetric one is basically the sender and the receiver have a common private key. Each one needs to know what that is, and it requires a secure exchange. In this case, it's a very straightforward transaction. You basically encrypt your message. It's scrambled into a ciphertext. And then when it comes to the other side, they also have the same private key. You decrypt it, and then you're able to read it. So hopefully that's pretty straightforward, the two types of encryption. Now, which one is better? As you can imagine, symmetric encryption is very, very fast. But it may not be as safe to certain aspect. That's subjective, depending on the type of nature business you do. Because having that private key allows you to unlock. But because of its speed, it's probably the most commonly used for e-commerce transaction. The last thing you want to do is make a transaction complex. Asymmetric is much more complex. It is more secure, but with that safety comes a price. Much more computational requirements, and the process takes longer. Now we talked about algorithm. Basically that's kind of the secret sauce, or kind of the the science behind how you take something that's a plain text and then convert it into a ciphertext. There's numerous algorithms out there. You probably heard these terms, RSA, and DES, which used to be kind of a standard, which was developed by IBM. AES is probably the gold standard that people use. You'll hear a lot of terms like 128 and 256. But I would posit that this is one of the areas that you might want to think about. Is AES tends to be the gold standard. You want to be able to kind of make sure when you're talking to your data protection company, whether it's on-premise or off-premise, are they AES capable? And this is probably the block cipher standard for the next 15 to 25 years. There are others out there, as I mentioned here, Blowfish, IDEA, and Skipjack. But I would say focus most of your attention on AES. Now, as we talked about, data breach is a big problem. And it's actually more problematic depending on the industry you play in. As you can see with this study, which was done in 2013 from Ponemon Institute, they did a per capita data cost. So for every record, what is the cost to a company? As you can imagine, if you're in the healthcare business, you're in the financial business, pharmaceutical or transportation, you're dealing with very, very customer-sensitive data. And that's why in these types of industries, the cost of data breach is extremely high. This is just the cost of per record. So when you have millions and millions of records, you're talking about a colossal amount of data loss and loss in cost to your business bloodline. So it's very, very important that you're looking at encryption capabilities are going to be paramount when you look at data protection, because the data breach costs can be something that could be unsurmountable if you don't put in the right encryption capabilities. Another term you should be aware of, and depending on the type of business you're in, is we use the term called data in motion. And what that means is the data in motion is encrypted as it leaves the source location, and it's decrypted as it arrives at the destination location. So anything through the network, and as you're doing it, and it gets encrypted, and then when it lands, it basically gets decrypted. The other terminology that's used is data in motion. And as you can imagine, it's just the opposite. So there's no motion happening. Basically, data is at rest, and you're basically encrypting it when the data is at rest. Typically, this is happening when you're doing it at, for example, when the data is located in a tape or disk to X in that type of location. At Unitrends, we have a technology which is called Encrypt. And Encrypt is our encryption technology. And the key benefit of this to data backup and encryption is it's an integrated approach for encryption. It avoids the need for having a dedicated hardware to be able to do encryption. Basically, we have a core processor within our technology that allows you to kind of do the crunching you have to do the encryption. As you saw, this is, it is a science and an art to be able to do this type of capability with algorithms. Encryption happens automatically. And why is that important? As we talked about the data breach. There is no unencrypted data on your appliance. And that should give you a peace of mind to make sure that your data is safe. Remember all the gold standards we talked about. Unitrends Encrypt is AES 256, as well as our cloud offering where your data is located off-premise. It has AES certification, which is very, very important, especially if you're a customer in the federal government or you have some audit requirements and NSA. So it's a very high standard of encryption that is mandated by the government. We have, as I talked about, because it is CPU intensive to do encryption as well as you're doing other tasks to do your data protection, encryption is performed through a core processor hardware, which allows you not to take the overhead that your CPU is doing for other tasks for your data protection needs. We talked about data in motion, data at rest. We want to make sure that we can take advantage of both, but also, we want to minimize the network bandwidth requirements through compression and block level synchronization. We all talked about encryption is all about the keys. You have to have a very sophisticated key management capability because that's really what's unlocking your data. Encrypt includes a very sophisticated key management capability, which not only protects the data as well as the users, but it also protects the user from, if you inadvertently lose historical keys, it has the ability to restore that. So having a very sophisticated key management is probably as important as the technologies that are performing the encryption. The most important thing, as we talked about with the C's at the beginning of this presentation, what we strive for is to reduce complexity. We want you to focus on your business, not worry about exactly how everything works, how everything needs to happen. So our solution for encryption is all about making it simple to install, simple to use, and be able to focus on your business versus having to be worried about the privacy and the protection of your data. So this concludes the three major sections I wanted to talk about. And I wanted to also make sure that you take advantage of the capabilities we bring here. Feel free to go to our website on unitrends.com. Please feel free to test some of the software that we have down there. We have some trial offers. As we talked about at the beginning of the hour, if you've got questions, make sure you're sending that over to info@unitrends.com or the phone number. I really appreciate your time to attending the session. I'll open up the floor for any Q&A.
Subo, I really appreciate that. I want to remind everybody that we're talking to Subo Guha, who is Vice President of Product Management and Marketing at Unitrends, Unified Data Protection Without Limits. And this is the point, as Subo said, where we will take your questions and comments, as many as we can get to in the next few minutes. Subo, I first want to start by saying thank you for a great presentation. Now, while you say that Unitrends is attempting to make this process as easy as possible so that people who are on this call can focus on their business, I think everyone would agree that the detailed explanation of what's important in these three critical pillars that Unitrends pays such close attention to, while that's important to have that be integrated and transparent so that people don't have to worry about it, it's nice to understand how it all works. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to leave this screen up right here in case anybody wants to contact folks at Unitrends. In the meantime, I want to go ahead and start first question of the day, and I think that this one is probably one of the most frequently asked questions. Says, I have a very mixed IT environment. Will Unitrends work in my environment? So you said, you sort of answered this at the very beginning. The idea is you guys recognize that most IT environments right now are hybrid, a little bit of private cloud, a little bit of public cloud, some on-premises solutions that aren't in the cloud at all. And it seems pretty clear that Unitrends works across the board, not an issue for you guys, right?
Yes, and that's one of the things we strive for, is because, as I mentioned, there is no one shoe that fits all. We've talked to thousands and thousands of customers, and rightfully so. Our customers are buying things that they think is relevant based on their budget, their needs, as well as the applications they're building to run their businesses. So we make sure that whether you're trying to protect a physical server, the storage is on a SAN device or a NAS device or a DAS device, or you're moving rapidly into a virtualized environment, we protect them all. So we take a very big pride to make sure that we can manage very mixed environments. And as you know, there's Windows, there's Unix, there's Linux. We listen to our customers, and we try to protect a very hybrid environment.
Okay, this next one I think is probably near and dear to everybody who's thinking about big data, one of the most important issues of this era anyway. With the expected growth of data, how does Unitrends' product portfolio adapt to increasing data growth? So is there any issue when it comes to the different encryption methodologies, and what makes Unitrends better than others? Or conversely, what are the challenges?
Yeah, so when we talk about how does people adapt to the different data growth, so the key thing is, as we talked about encryption and deduplication, main thing is you've got to be smart about how you store your data. What you don't want to do is just let the data store and just keep growing and growing. So being able to compress it properly, deduplicate it properly, allows you to make sure that you're not overly using more storage than you need to. So we're very cognizant of that because of budgetary needs as well as being able to optimize how much people can spend. But more importantly is how to manage growth, right? So we have a very scalable line of solution that allows you to keep growing as your data grows. But more importantly, we have technologies that allows you to compress it, deduplicate it. If there's only changes, let's just back up the changes. It's like when I have a Mac here, and the last thing I want to do is have 40 gigabytes or whatever I have stored, and every time I change, I'm having 40 plus 40 plus 40, right? And I'll just run out of backup space in my time capsule. The same concept applies here. You want to be able to incrementally back up what you've changed. So we have different technologies that allows us to make sure that you're optimizing how much storage you're using and then grow as you need to. And we're constantly looking at how we can improve that on-premise as well as in the cloud.
Now our next question comes from George, and it's very specific, so I may generalize it unless you can answer this directly. George says, can Unitrends fit with PeopleSoft procurement modules? So is it compatible with some of the specific applications that a lot of people are using for business process management, such as PeopleSoft or any of the others?
Yeah, so one of the things we also do is we understand that people want to do more granular level protection. So we actually have capabilities to look at different applications. So for example, if it's an Oracle application, it could be a SharePoint or something like that, or a database. We provide capabilities to go more granular into that application level. So the answer is yes. I'd have to understand correctly specifically what module you're looking at, but we constantly also add new application management to our portfolio. And the point that we talked about is we kind of start at the granular byte level, whether it's the server and storage. As you move into application level, we kind of support all through the value chain that customers are looking for.
Gabor and Kaleem both say, thanks for a great presentation. And Gabor and Kaleem, thanks for your note as well. I appreciate that. Consider your thanks passed on to our guest, Subho Guha. Subho, next question. And this one is, I think, important to probably everybody who's on this call today. When you described what Unitrends has to offer, your slide demonstrated on-premises replicating to off-premises for disaster. Is there a good reason for this? Is this just how you guys do it? Why the on-premises replicating as opposed to just the on-premises for disaster recovery?
Yeah, so as we talked about, right, last thing you want to do is constantly backing up every time you make a change, right? What you want to be able to do is just incrementally back up what you changed. So as customers are starting to have much more rigorous disaster recovery practices, they're starting to adopt the cloud. And that's what I talk about off-premise, right? So that you're able to replicate what you have on your premise. And then as you're making changes, you don't have to worry about, do I have that change automatically updated on the off-premise? So our technology allows you to continuously replicate the data, the changes that you're doing on your off-premise, and in our situation, which is our cloud, and that's stored in the back end where you don't have to worry. We are using SAN or NAS-based technologies to store that data. But the key point here is whatever you have on site is continuously being backed up and replicated with only the changes you've made on an off-site premise.
Now you talked about avoiding the shortcuts and getting duped by deduplication. So I'm gonna ask you another question because that was good advice. If there was one thing that I should be investing in when it comes to my data and backup plan, what would it be? So, and it's easy for you to just say, well, the Unitrends solution. But if you were talking to somebody who really was just getting started, where's the one place or the one thing that they should be spending their money on?
Yeah, and that's a good point. I actually won't mention Unitrends. What I would recommend to customers, and I do that on a daily basis, is develop a very strong disaster recovery practice. And I've seen that over and over again. People think, oh, let me buy technology and that'll solve my problem. It doesn't. You really need to think about what your business is about, what data is important, how much can you tolerate if I don't have that data or application. When you start thinking in that terms, you start thinking about a process of how I can be proactive when things go bad. So I would say if you invested in nothing else, invest in a very strong DR practice, that will then allow you to be intelligent to ask the questions, what technology or solution allows me to support my DR practice?
Okay, now you're talking about practices and best practices. What about time frame? What's reasonable in terms of what somebody should expect when it comes to recovering data after a disaster? Is that dependent upon how critical that data is to the business, or is there a rule of thumb that you like to use in terms of being able to actually get that data back up, recovered, and put back to good use?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question, the million-dollar question, right? So you've heard all these horror stories, like the latest one with Target losing all their customer credit card data. So for some, the tolerance is, a minute could crash a company, right? So if you're a retail customer or you're a financial customer. So there is no one answer to this. What you have to do is if you have a good DR practice, you understand the value of your data. Sometimes you have a tolerance for some data, which is critical customer data, financial data. You cannot tolerate more than an hour or maybe 30 minutes, or it could be, in a day. And then some are more, maintenance data that you could probably recover within 24 hours or maybe, probably not in a week. So I cannot give you a specific answer. It really will depend on the business you're in. But yeah, I would strongly recommend tier your data depending on what drives your business, and that will come up in terms of what the time frames are to how much you're able to tolerate your data. And then we can work with you to say this type of data needs to be covered faster than the other. Let's make sure we have the technology and process in place to recover that faster than the other data that you have a little bit more tolerance for.
Okay, so we mentioned a lot of terms, two of them, replication, deduplication, encryption, right, among many others. Are you unable to encrypt data when you're deduping it, or if you're deduping it? Can it still be encrypted and deduped? Are these machines, are these encryption algorithms able to essentially orchestrate so that you can still dedupe encrypted data? Are they smart or are they dumb?
No, so for the solutions we have are definitely smart, and that's what the algorithms do. So the question is, it's not an either or. Our recommendation is you better do both. Right? So deduplication is about how much space savings you will get. Encryption about is how secure is your data so that somebody can understand what you have, right? So you have to drive a balance between the two. As I mentioned in one of the slides, encryption does negatively impact deduplication. But I think you need to do both, right? You're obviously concerned about security as well as how much you store. So you have to kind of have the intelligence and solutions. So when you're asking your vendors, ask how they do it and how do they orchestrate both of them together.
Okay, a couple more questions here before we let you go. This one is very interesting. You talked about global deduplication and local deduplication. Is there a time difference in terms of how long it takes to, on average, how much longer it takes global deduplication compared to local deduplication, or is it generally happening dynamically in real time so that there is no real amount of time that needs to be attached to either?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So again, people use this term in different ways, so let me kind of use both definitions. If you define global deduplication as can you do more than one virtual machine on a single appliance, you're not going to see much difference in the time if you do one VM versus others, because we kind of do this in parallel. If you talk about global deduplication means you're deduplicating across multiple devices, like multiple appliances, yes, obviously that's going to take a longer time, right? So depending on which way you're doing, within an appliance, you should not see much difference. But when you're doing it across multiple appliances, yes, you'll get better compression ratios, but it does take a little bit more longer.
Okay, final question of the day. And this is probably, you mentioned the $64 million question, but this is actually it. Best place to start. A lot of people out there, I'm sure, have old backup and recovery systems. Many of them do not take into consideration this hybrid cloud or this hybrid IT environment that you talked about at the very beginning of the presentation. Where is the best place for somebody to start after walking away from this presentation?
Yeah, and so obviously the answer would be definitely, this is the business we're in. So one of the things we like to do is have a conversation with our customers to say, what is your business problem? And so, I'd strongly recommend come to our site. There's a bunch of information about best practices. If you're kind of lost in terms of where do I start, or you could be at a process of you're just frustrated with the technology you have. I want a more open solution. I want a solution that's unified across physical, virtual, and cloud. We kind of have the best of both worlds to be able to provide all different types of capabilities. I'm not going to say that we the only ones that provide it in the marketplace, but strongly recommend you come to our site or call. But there's also a lot of best practices out there. Obviously, talk to some of the analysts you may be prescribing to. They'll talk about some of the best practices. But the best way to start is let's have a discussion, right? And then let's see how we can solve your business problem.
And I've put all those numbers back up on the screen for anybody who wants them. Several different ways to contact the folks at Unitrends. And actually, Subo yourself, you can contact him by sending an email to info@unitrends.com. Subo, thanks for all your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Really great presentation. Again, that's been Subo Guha, who is Vice President of Product Management Marketing at Unitrends. This has been a special presentation of Unitrends, Resolve to Build a Better Backup Plan in 2014, utilizing the cloud, dedupe, and encryption. Of course, brought to you by Unitrends, United Data Protection without limits. Learn more at unitrends.com.